Hi guys, what's up? This is going to be a re-recorded version of my triangle review because the first review was quite rambly, quite drawn out, and I didn't feel like I explained everything brilliantly, so I'm going to try to do a better job here. The plot of Triangle is quite a lot more complicated than you might think. The main point of confusion being the loops and how exactly they work. So I'm just going to try to explain it to you as clearly as I possibly can. Jess gets on the yacht, wakes up, and doesn't appear to remember what her dream was about. She seems a little bit happier afterwards, but there's still a kind of feeling of unease there. Eventually, Greg gets the distress call. He can't get the caller's location and he doesn't know who it is. And then the storm hits. After the storm hits, Jess still seems kind of vacant. It's obvious she has a feeling something's wrong, but she doesn't quite know what. The ship shows up and everyone else is shouting and she's just kind of staring at it blankly. So we get the feeling again, she knows something's wrong but she doesn't know what. We'll call the Jess we're following in the film Jess number one. So Jess number one and the rest of them, they're all number one too, board. When Jess number one boards, there are already two other Jesses on board, Jess zero and Jess minus one, we all call them. Jess minus one has already been on board the ship for 2 cycles and is going to get pushed off in this one, and Jess zero has been aboard the ship for 1 cycle. It is important to note that Jess number one, in the first cycle, does not know that there are other versions of her on board the ship. She just has a vague feeling that something's off. Eventually, once she splits up from the rest of the group, she hears a gunshot, goes to the theatre. She ends up blamed for killing Greg because that was just minus one that did, not just one. But of course, the others don't know either. They think it's Jess, and the masked person starts shooting. Then Jess minus one and Jess one end up in a showdown. Jess one wins, throws Jess minus one overboard, and then the cycle resets. So now there's Jess zero, who has been on board the ship for 2 cycles, Jess one, who we're following, who's been on board the ship for one, and Jess two, who is just about to board. And interestingly, Jess two is boarding from the left, whereas Jess one, we boarded from the right. Jess we're following boarded from the right. The Jess after her is boarding from the left, and the Jess before her, so that's Jess zero, who has been on the ship for 2 cycles, presumably boarded from the left too, so it alternates. Left, right, left, right. This might seem quite confusing, but I'm just trying my best to make it clear to you. Anyway, moving on. Jess 1, our Jess, hides from Group 2, but in doing so ends up dropping her keys. She runs away so she doesn't get spotted, and Victor from Group 2 picks up her keys. Jess 1 then just kind of goes exploring and then sees the notes. If they board, kill them all. She writes another one, presumably for future Jesses to see. And then she gets a shotgun, ends up seeing Victor. She points a gun at Jess 2, who has just boarded the ship, but can't shoot, and Jess 2 runs away. It is implied Victor either succumbs to his wounds or Jess 2 comes back and finishes him off after she's run off, since we don't really see any more of Jess 2. Jess 1 is intent on changing the pattern, and when it comes to the theatre scene, and Jess 0 is above, masked, trying to shoot Downey and Sally, Jess 1 manages to prevent this from happening and ends up shooting Jess 0 in the top of the head. She doesn't kill her, but she does injure her. Jess 1 tries to explain to Sally 2 and Downey 2 what is going on, and Downey 2 says she's not really making much sense, and she simply says, if anybody comes, shoot them, trust no one. Jess 1 then runs off because she's trying to find Victor. Once she goes off to find Victor, Jess 0 manages to find Downey 2 and Sally 2. She is the one that was shot in the head, the unmasked killer Jess. So now Jess Zero is all bloodied on the face, and Downey's like, "What the fuck happened to you?" Strangely, Jess Zero seems a whole lot darker than Jess -1 did, even though they're both in their third stage on the ship. And I have a theory about that, which I'll get onto later. So Jess Zero, I mean, Downey doesn't realize it's not the same. It's not the same Jess. He thinks it's the same Jess, just something happened to her. But Jess Zero then leads Downey and Sally 2 into a room 237, which is an Easter egg to The Shining, and she kills them in there. Or she kills Downey. She wounds Sally, and Sally manages to get away, makes a distress call, and Jess Zero doesn't seem too intent on chasing Sally. It's Jess 1 who ends up hearing what's going on, and then she tries to reach Greg 3, who has not yet hit the storm but is about to, and then he hits the storm, and Jess 1 can't get through to him. So Jess 1 then goes and finds Sally 2 on the top deck, bleeding out. Down below, she sees Jess 2 kill Jess 0 with an axe and then throw her overboard. Just after this happens, Sally 2 dies, and Jess 1 and Jess 2 both watch Group 3 coming in. They've hit the storm, and they're again boarding from the right. So Jess 1 is now in stage 3, or cycle 3, and she ends up becoming the masked killer Jess, and she knows what she needs to do. She knows what she needs to do to get off the ship now. She needs to kill them and then stop the next group of people from boarding, and then they'll be safe. She gets a shotgun, and then she starts shooting everybody in the theater. But she misses Jess 3. So Jess 1 and Jess 3 have a showdown. It plays exactly how it played out between Jess 1 and Jess -1. Jess 1 gets thrown overboard, and she goes back home. Once Jess 1 gets home, she then sees herself abusing her son, and then kills herself, gets her son into the car, thinks she's escaped the loop, but then sees a pile of dead seagulls. This freaks her out, and once she ends up in the car crash, she gets out, the screen goes weirdly dark, and she goes to the harbour, and it appears she still has her memories at this point. She knows what she needs to do, and it's implied that she may become an even number Jess. Jess 4 now, since the last Jess on the ship was Jess 3, who killed her. She's in the next cycle of people, and so now she is Jess 4 after that, an even number Jess. Now, even I am struggling to quite make that all make sense, but I hope I did a good enough job so you get the gist of what the loop is kind of doing and how it's functioning. But I just wanted to say the odd and even number Jesses appear to be different. Odd number Jesses board from the right, and they seem to be a little bit more almost nervous, scared. Even number Jesses board from the left, they are the ones that get unmasked, and they kind of have this evil look in their eyes. They're the more evil versions of Jess. Interesting. It's almost like, right is good and left is evil. In any case, neither version of Jess, manages to stay on the ship for more than 3 cycles at one time. One gets flat out killed on the ship and then thrown overboard. One just gets thrown overboard, and it's implied she drowns. That's the plot and the loops out of the way. Now I just want to go over some theories about the film. There is a theory that this takes place in the afterlife, some kind of special hell created to punish Jess. And I'm personally quite on board with this theory, because if you look at the time on her watch, it says 8:17, but Greg makes it 11:30. The clock on the ship says 8:17. So it's obvious something bad happened to Jess at 8:17. I think personally the car accident happened at 8:17 in real life, because it says Greg told her to meet at the harbour at 8:30. You see the post-it note on her fridge. So if she dies at 8:17, it would make sense that she crashed her car driving to the harbour, died in the crash, and Tommy was in the car with her, and she was perhaps responsible for his death, and she can't accept that. So with her being responsible for her son's death, as well as being a bad mum, means that she is now put in a hell. Her one day off hell, perhaps. If you listen carefully, at one point, Jess screams, "I just wished for one fucking day off." I mean, granted, there's some voice cracks in the sentence, but, if you listen, you can hear it. This is where the story ties back into Sisyphus. Just as Sisyphus was doomed to repeat a task forever and ever and ever and ever without succeeding, Jess is always doomed to repeat her one day off forever and ever and ever and ever without ever managing to get her son back. It seems like a really nice punishment on the surface. You get to have a day off forever. You're on a sailing trip with a guy you probably like and some of his friends. However, it will keep going wrong. It will keep ending up with a cruise ship. Jess will then realise she needs to save her son, or she wants to see her son again. She'll see him, and then the car crash happens, and she's taken away from him again. But she wants to see her son, and she knows she can by going through the loop again. So she goes back to the harbour just to see her son again. She can't come to terms with the fact that she was responsible for his death. So I think that that's Jess's punishment, and it really is like a modern day retelling of Sisyphus being doomed to repeat a task forever and ever without ever succeeding. Now I think it's important to clear up some general stuff about the movie, things that many people disagree on, and give my takes. So firstly, it's debated over when exactly Jess loses her memories. Some people think that she loses them when she falls asleep on the yacht, and then she wakes up and says she can't remember what dream she had. However, to me, it seems like she's still aware something is wrong. So I'm not exactly sure she loses her memories per se. There are a couple of people who say that she loses her memories during or just after the storm, but I'm not exactly sure about that either, because when she's looking at the boat, she isn't exactly screaming for help like the others. She's just kind of blankly staring, and you get the feeling she still knows something isn't right. So that being said, I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that she never really loses her memories entirely, but they do get fuzzied, kind of blurred. It's almost like remembering snippets of a movie or snippets of a quote rather than the entire thing. I think Jess never loses the sense that something is wrong, but it's so kind of hazy, it's not enough to stop her from boarding the ship. I feel like when do her memories kind of get blurred? Well, it's either the storm or the nap. Either one honestly works fine, and trying to narrow down which one I think is pointless. The bottom line is, before she boards the ship, her previously vivid memories get blurred to nothing more than, there's something a little bit wrong here, and I've got a little bit of deja vu, but hey, this seems like safety, so I guess I've got to go with my friends. It kind of gets blurred down to that level somewhere. Again, not important exactly where, but my point is I don't think Jess ever completely loses her memories. Some people also say the loop would eventually break itself because the seagulls would pile up too high, or the bodies would pile up too high, the dead Sallys, and they'd see it and they wouldn't get on the ship after many, many thousand loops. But me personally, I think the key to the bodies is the seagulls. If you'll notice, they're nibbling at the dead Sallys, and when Jess comes, lots of them fly away. So, given enough time, the gulls would consume enough of the bodies, or the bodies would decompose enough, to the point where the gulls could, I don't know, get rid of them to an extent where they're not going to totally pile up and just, well, make the ship sink. You know what I mean? And for the dead seagulls, if you'll notice, there are crabs nibbling at those. So I think the crabs take care of the seagulls enough so that they never, form a ridiculous tower, but at the same time, they can't consume them at that quick a rate. So by the time that Jess gets back there, you see the seagulls are still in a bit of a pile. Another thing people wonder about is, how does the axe replenish itself? How do the shotgun shells replenish themselves? How do the supplies come back, essentially, on the ship? Is there some kind of never-ending supply chain? The ghost supply or something? Now, in fairness, I'm not quite sure on this one either, and I think it is a little bit of a plot hole that we have to fill with our imagination as best as we can. But I think there's generally one Jess we're not keeping track of. The only scene where we see three is where there's one Jess bludgeoning another to death on the bottom deck, and we're viewing it from the perspective of our Jess. So that's how we know there's three in one go. But we don't actually see three Jesses very often. So there's often one missing. I have a feeling that whichever Jess is missing is the one that tends to replenish the supplies. That's my theory. I mean, it doesn't totally work, but it's the best explanation I can think of. And again, I do think it is a bit of a plot hole in the movie. But yeah, that's my explanation on that. Another possible explanation is that the ship itself is actually in a time loop. So the supplies auto-replenish by default, and that would also explain why the food freshens up. Again, my theory is that the supplies are replaced by other Jesses, but the ship itself being a time loop and the ship itself replenishing the supplies, that's equally valid if you want to go with that. There is also a theory that there is a second version of events on the yacht. If you'll notice, Sally doesn't make the distress call every cycle. Only Sally 2 makes the distress call to Greg 3, and I would assume Sally 0 made the distress call to Greg 1. Greg 1 is the one we were with. And I think that does support the theory that there was another version of events on the yacht for the even Jesses that we never see. The director never shoots them. So we're left to imagine what happened. They still hit the storm and they still see the ship, but the even Jess's personalities are a bit different. So are her memories perhaps less fuzzy in the even cycles or something? Maybe explaining her more determined, ruthless nature. If they don't get the distress call, then, well, the storm scene would be slightly different. The conversations may be different. And I definitely think that's valid. I definitely think there's a second version of events on the yacht that we never get. But we're left to imagine that essentially is this story of the even Jesses. Again, we just don't see it. Honestly, that about covers it. There are probably other theories, and the video would literally be an hour if I went through all of them, but you can look them up yourself because this has dragged on long enough already. I hope you enjoyed my review of Triangle. It's definitely a movie I recommend. I really enjoyed it myself. And yeah, peace out.